The sight of a Model T rattling down a dirt road became normal in the 1920s. Ford's sturdy cars put motoring within reach of regular families, not just the wealthy. Suddenly, trips didn't depend on trains or horses. You could load the kids, crank the engine, and rattle off to town with your very own wheels. In 1920, a man earned about $1,400 to $3,269 a year, roughly $22,000 to $49,000 today. That wasn't much, even during the Roaring Twenties, but it bought some comfort while prosperity lasted. People stretched what they had, knowing the next layoff or market crash could come any day. For most, just holding steady was enough. The skyline started to change as skyscrapers rose higher every year. Buildings like the Chrysler Building reached for the clouds with shining steel and Art Deco spires. People craned their necks on sidewalks just to take it all in. It was a new kind of pride. America building upward, proving modern life could touch the sky. Prohibition made liquor illegal, but the speakeasies never stopped flowing. Hidden behind soda shops, barber doors, or basements, you could push through with a password and hear clinking glasses over jazz. Everyone knew they weren't supposed to be there, but that made it all the more exciting. A taste of defiance poured into a shot glass. A modest home in the early 20s cost about $3,000, equal to around $30,000 today. Neighborhoods were quieter, houses simpler, and luxuries scarce. Still, with steady work and frugality, families could manage. Putting down roots wasn't easy, but it felt possible. And that sense of owning even a humble place gave people pride and stability. Jazz spilled out of city dance halls late into the night, horns blaring and drums pounding. Young people tried the Charleston and the Black Bottom, their shoes wearing thin on crowded floors. For a generation breaking away from their parents' ways, jazz wasn't just music, it was freedom, rebellion, and a reason to keep dancing until dawn. In 1920, women gained the right to vote, and lines outside polling stations filled with faces proud and determined. Mothers, daughters, and grandmothers cast ballots for the very first time. After years of marches and protests, it was a moment of triumph. Whole towns felt history shift as women's voices finally entered the voting booth. Long parades filled city streets, and ticker tape fluttered down like snow from tall buildings. After a big event, a World Series win, a returning hero, or Lindbergh's flight, crowds gathered shoulder to shoulder, marching bands played, floats rolled by, and the air was alive with cheering. For a moment, everyone felt part of something bigger. Bootleggers thundered across back roads at night, whiskey sloshing in hidden compartments. Headlights were covered or dimmed, cars roaring just ahead of the law. Sometimes the chase ended in a crash, sometimes in a payoff. For small towns, those rumbling engines in the dark meant another secret delivery had slipped past Prohibition's watchful eyes. Flappers turned tradition on its head. They bobbed their hair short, wore dresses above the knee, and rolled their stockings down. Cigarettes dangled from fingers while they danced to jazz. It wasn't just fashion. It was a statement that women were freer than their mothers had been, daring anyone to tell them otherwise. America noticed. Watching a Ford assembly line in Detroit was like seeing the future in motion. Cars rolled past faster than anyone believed possible, each worker adding a single piece. What once took days was done in hours. Ordinary men and women knew they were witnessing a change that would carry America into a new modern age. The Harlem Renaissance pulsed through clubs and theaters. Duke Ellington led his band, Louis Armstrong blew his horn, and Bessie Smith sang the blues that reached down deep. Crowds lined up outside to hear music unlike anything before. For Black America, it was expression and pride. For the rest of the country, a revelation. Summer porches turned into ice cream parlors when hand-cranked churns came out. Families packed salt and ice around the tin can, then took turns turning the handle. The work built tired arms, but when the lid finally came off, the reward was cold, sweet, and shared by everyone. It tasted of effort, laughter, and summer itself. There was nothing like the first time families heard a radio broadcast. Folks gathered close around a wooden box that glowed faintly and crackled with static until a voice finally came through. News, music, and speeches suddenly filled the parlor, making it feel as if the outside world had stepped right into your living room. Baseball heroes like Babe Ruth towered over the country. Crowds gasped as he sent balls soaring right out of Yankee Stadium, his name filling headlines coast to coast. Kids swung broomsticks pretending to be him, and even folks who couldn't afford a ticket knew they were watching history whenever the Babe stepped up to bat. Silent movie houses drew packed crowds every weekend. Charlie Chaplin with his Little Tramp Shuffle, Buster Keaton with his stone face. They had entire audiences laughing without speaking a word. Organ music filled the air as reels clicked away, turning flickering shadows on a screen into joy that families carried with them back onto the street. Families gathered around phonographs, spinning records that scratched and hissed, but carried the magic of music straight into their parlor. Jazz bands, crooners, and even vaudeville acts came alive from a spinning disc. Children sat cross-legged on rugs, heads tilted toward the horn, marveling that voices could be captured and replayed right there at home. Automats popped up in big cities, marvels of modern convenience. For just a nickel, you could slide open a little glass door and pull out pie, sandwiches, or coffee. Behind the scenes, cooks kept trays stocked. To a hungry worker, it felt futuristic. Food without waiters. Neon signs arrived with a glow nobody had ever seen before. Bright colors buzzed above main streets, promising soda, barbers, or theaters. The glow cut through smoke and fog, lighting up nighttime sidewalks like daylight. For towns used to gas lamps, neon felt like something out of science fiction, modern, alive, and impossible to miss. Roller skates with clattering metal wheels became a favorite pastime. You could hear kids rattling down sidewalks outside the corner store or circling around neighborhood blocks. They weren't smooth like modern skates. They vibrated your bones. But that was part of the fun. Skinned knees and laughter often went together when the whole street joined in. A bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents was a little luxury everyone knew. Sold from ice-chilled coolers and glass bottles, it was sweet, fizzy, and a perfect break from the day's work. On a hot afternoon, nothing beat leaning on a counter with that cold glass sweating in your hand and bubbles fizzing up. Boys in knickerbockers and flat caps darted through town running errands for pennies. They carried groceries, shined shoes, or delivered papers, their pockets jingling with nickels by sundown. Clothes were patched, shoes scuffed, but they learned the value of work early. These boys weren't just playing. They were helping keep family budgets afloat with every errand. Shoe-shining boys worked downtown corners with a snap of their rags. Men lined up, leaning back in chairs while shoes gleamed under quick hands. For a dime, you walked away with leather polished bright and a little conversation, too. Those boys had rhythm in their work, turning a chore into something almost like entertainment. Rural homes still lit themselves with kerosene lamps as electricity slowly reached beyond the cities. At night, families gathered in one room with the warm glow of a single flame. Shadows stretched across wood-paneled walls, and children bent close over homework or storybooks. Until the wires came through, that little flame was the whole world. Ice cream sodas at the local drugstore fountain were a family treat. You sat on high stools while the soda jerk worked behind the counter, mixing syrup, soda water, and ice cream into a foamy delight. Kids' eyes lit up at the sight, and parents savored the small luxury together on hot summer days. Newsboys shouted headlines from evening papers, their voices echoing down busy streets. They waved stacks of newsprint, calling out about Wall Street booms, scandals in Hollywood, or ball scores. For a penny, you caught up with the world, and if you didn't buy, you still heard the news hollered into the city air. Farmers rolled into town on Saturdays, wagons piled high with produce. Horses were tied outside while families stocked up on supplies and shared gossip in the market square. It was a weekly ritual, part business and part reunion. The smell of fresh bread, apples, and livestock mixed into the air, the whole town alive. Kids made kites from paper and string, running across empty lots where houses hadn't yet been built. The wind carried them high, and laughter carried higher. With no gadgets or screens, a homemade kite was enough to turn an afternoon into magic. Parents leaned on fences watching, smiling at something so simple and timeless. Men crowded sidewalks in straw boater hats and wide-lapelled suits, looking sharp even in the heat. Pocket watches gleamed on chains, shoes shined, and cigars dangled as they strolled. Fashion wasn't casual. It was pride. Walking down a busy city street felt like stepping into a parade of hats, coats, and voices rising above the noise. Church picnics filled the summer calendar. Families spread blankets under oak trees. Children ran barefoot through the grass, and tables sagged under fried chicken, lemonade, and pies ready for judging. Everyone brought their best dish, and gossip mixed with hymn singing. It wasn't fancy, but it was community. Neighbors gathering together for food, laughter, and faith. The clatter of typewriters echoed through new office buildings, keys hammering like a steady rain. Rows of clerks hunched over desks, papers stacked high, while bosses barked orders, carbon copies smudged fingers black, and the bell at the end of each line rang out. That sound defined modern business, the heartbeat of American industry. Sunday afternoons were often spent in vaudeville theaters. For a nickel, you could watch magicians pull scarves from hats, singers belt out show tunes, and comedians tell jokes that made the rafters shake. The acts were quick, lively, and always changing. Families went in tired from the week and came out grinning ear to ear. In classrooms lined with chalkboards and wooden desks, students stood each morning to pledge allegiance. Small hands pressed to hearts, voices reciting together under the watchful eye of a stern teacher. Ink-stained fingers scribbled across copybooks, erasers squeaked on the board, and discipline was strict. Those little rituals built a rhythm into everyday school life. Streetcars rattled across city streets, bells clanging as commuters jumped on and off. Wooden benches creaked, windows rattled, and conductors barked, "Step lively!" as the cars jolted forward. For pennies, you could cross town faster than walking. Cities pulsed to the rhythm of those steel wheels grinding tracks and sparks flashing on overhead lines. Soda jerks in white hats worked fountains like showmen, pulling levers, stirring syrups, and frothing up phosphates or egg creams. Teenagers crowded the counter, elbows on marble tops, sipping through paper straws. Flirty chatter and laughter mixed with the hiss of soda water. It was cheap fun and a sweet escape on a hot afternoon. Families piled into their cars for the very first road trips, maps unfolded on laps. Dad wrestled with directions, Mom passed sandwiches, and kids bounced in the back seat, pointing at passing barns. Gas stations dotted the highways, and every stop felt like an adventure. America was finally on the move, exploring its own backyard. Brightly painted merry-go-rounds spun at county fairs, their calliope music echoing across dusty fields. Horses, lions, and swans bobbed up and down as kids clutched the poles. Lights blinked, parents waved from benches, and the smell of popcorn floated on the breeze. For a few minutes, the whole world seemed to move in circles of joy. On warm evenings, men pulled out banjos on front porches, fingers flying over strings. Neighbors clapped along, children stomped bare feet in rhythm, and music drifted down quiet streets. It wasn't professional, but it was heartfelt. Songs learned by ear, passed down from family to family, turned an ordinary evening into something worth remembering. Filling up the tank meant about 30 cents a gallon, roughly $3.50 today. Cars were still novelties, and families planned drives like small adventures rather than errands. The smell of gasoline, the wipe of a windshield, and the clang of the pump handle made even a gas stop feel exciting. Traveling circuses rolled into towns, pitching big striped tents on the edge of fields. Posters promised lions, trapeze acts, and clowns tumbling over themselves. Children stared wide-eyed as parades marched down Main Street, elephants lumbering along. For small towns with few distractions, the circus brought color, noise, and wonder, leaving dust and excitement in its wake. Barnstorming pilots buzzed overhead, pulling loop-de-loops and dives that left crowds gasping. For many, it was the first time they'd ever seen an airplane, and the roar of the engine sounded like the future. Kids ran chasing shadows across fields, craning their necks while daredevils wrote smoky patterns in the wide-open sky. Farmers harvested wheat with horse-drawn combines, sweat rolling down their backs under the sun. Teams strained against the harness, blades rattled, and golden grain poured into sacks. It was grueling, dusty work, and families often pitched in together. Tractors would soon take over, but in those days, horsepower still meant real horses pulling the load. Summer evenings brought families to porches, rocking chairs creaking as they cooled off after dinner. The air buzzed with cicadas, hand fans waved lazily, and conversations drifted about the day's work. Children chased fireflies across the yard while parents swapped stories. Those porch gatherings gave neighborhoods their heartbeat, long before televisions drew everyone inside. Men wore suspenders clipped to trousers with pocket watches dangling from vests. Hats were tipped politely on sidewalks, shoes polished bright. Fashion was more than clothes. It was respectability, a way to look sharp even on ordinary days. You could tell a man's pride by how he dressed, whether for the office, the farm, or Main Street. Women sewed their own dresses from patterns found in Sears catalogs. Fabric was ordered by mail or bought downtown, cut and stitched by hand at kitchen tables. Each dress carried the mark of the woman who made it, fitting her family better than store-bought ever could. Style wasn't just bought. It was created with care. Early vacuum cleaners were heavy contraptions, rattling awkwardly across rugs. They hummed and clunked while cords tangled around furniture, but families marveled at the way they sucked up dust without a broom. Housewives bragged about the latest models, even if using them left you sweaty. Clumsy as they were, they felt like magic in motion. Penny candy sparkled in glass jars at corner stores. Kids pressed noses to the glass, agonizing over which sweets to buy with a single coin. Licorice sticks, lemon drops, or jawbreakers, it didn't matter. The thrill was in the choice, the rustle of the paper bag, and the taste of sugar on the walk home. Men in overalls worked fences with hand tools, sweat-soaking shirts under the sun. Post holes were dug with shovels, rails hammered into place, and wire stretched by calloused hands. It was slow, grueling labor, often done after a full day in the fields. That sweat equity built the boundaries and barns that still stand today. The first radio jingles began slipping into homes, little tunes advertising soap, coffee, or tobacco. Catchy and clever, they stuck in your head long after the program ended. Families hummed them without realizing it. Proof that the new world of radio wasn't just entertainment. It was the start of modern advertising weaving into daily life. Paperboys on bicycles pedaled through neighborhoods, canvas bags bulging with newspapers. They tossed rolled-up copies onto porches, sometimes missing and hitting bushes instead. The sound of a bike chain in the dawn and the thud of newsprint on wooden steps was part of morning life. Those boys learned responsibility before the sun even rose. Farmers' wives stretched laundry across long clotheslines, shirts and dresses flapping in the breeze. Soap suds stung raw hands, baskets creaked with weight, and wooden pins snapped into place. The yard became a parade of white sheets and patterned dresses. It was work, but when the breeze carried that clean smell inside, it felt worthwhile. College kids snuck into jazz clubs, combing their hair and pretending to be older. The music inside was irresistible, horns, pianos, and singers making the room jump. Drinks in hand, they laughed too loud and stayed too late, soaking up a scene that felt forbidden but thrilling. Those smoky clubs gave them stories they never forgot. Ice delivery men hauled giant blocks with iron tongs, sweat rolling down as they heaved them into kitchen ice boxes. Kids sometimes chased the wagon for chips of ice on hot days. It was heavy, exhausting work, but it kept families milk cold and butter firm long before refrigerators started humming in American kitchens. Barbershops were smoke-filled places where men puffed cigars as they waited, leather chairs creaking and striped poles spinning outside. Politics, ball scores, and gossip swirled with the haze. A haircut and shave were an excuse for conversation, and the smell of bay rum and cigar smoke clung long after you stepped back onto the street. Telephones crept slowly into rural homes, often arriving years behind the cities. Families shared party lines, meaning half the neighborhood could hear your business if they picked up. You'd wait for your ring pattern before answering. It wasn't private, but it connected farms and families in ways the telegraph never could, shrinking long distances overnight. In 1929, crowds gathered outside banks as panic set in. Years of easy credit and booming stocks crumbled in days. People lined sidewalks, desperate to withdraw savings that had already vanished. The sight of locked doors and posted notices brought tears, anger, and disbelief. That sudden collapse turned the Roaring Twenties into the Great Depression. Kids spun wooden tops on dusty sidewalks, snapping fingers or whipping strings to keep them humming. The whirring sound filled the air as they battled to see whose top could outlast the others. It was a simple game, costing almost nothing, but the joy of watching those little toys dance across the ground never wore off. Men in fedoras gathered on courthouse steps, leaning on canes or railings, puffing cigarettes while debating politics. Local elections, national headlines, and town gossip all got their share. Voices rose and fell in the summer air, hand gestures cutting sharp points. These steps weren't just stone, they were the stage where communities sorted out their opinions. Revival tents swept into towns like a storm, canvas flapping, lanterns glowing, and fiery preachers calling souls to salvation. Entire families attended, singing hymns that rolled across the fields. Faith and spectacle mixed together, with people shouting "Amen" and neighbors kneeling side by side. Those nights filled small towns with the spirit that lingered afterward. Home remedies passed down through families stood in for doctors most folks couldn't afford. Onion poultices for coughs, vinegar for fevers, turpentine on cuts. Some worked, some didn't, but they were what people had. Medicine cabinets held jars and bottles with handwritten labels, and neighbors swapped recipes as often as they swapped pies or tools. Gas station attendants wore caps and polished smiles, pumping your fuel and wiping down windshields with a rag. They'd check oil levels, tire pressure, and radiator water without being asked. Stations were friendly places where service came standard, and pulling in meant more than just gasoline. It meant a little conversation and the car ready for the road. Farmers huddled around battery-powered radios to hear weather forecasts, the crackling voices traveling miles across the air. Every report could mean the difference between saving crops or losing them. Families listened close, pencils ready to mark notes, while static hissed and signals faded. In lonely fields, those voices made the world feel a little smaller. Neighbors crowded into parlors, chairs pulled close to listen to the World Series on the radio. The announcer's voice painted every pitch, and cheers erupted as if the game were happening outside. Baseball brought people together, whether they loved the Yankees or hated them, and radios turned living rooms into miniature grandstands during the fall. The first neon signs began to glow outside drugstores and diners, casting strange colors onto sidewalks. Red, green, and blue letters hummed softly in the night air. People marveled at their glow, a mix of wonder and modern flash. Those buzzing tubes meant progress had reached even small towns, changing the look of Main Street forever. Shoe-shining boys snapped their rags in rhythm, black polish gleaming on worn leather shoes. For a dime, you could leave with footwear shining like new. Customers sat on tall chairs, reading the paper while boys worked fast, hands moving like lightning. It was hard work, but it gave kids spending money and pride in their craft. Milk still arrived in horse-drawn wagons, glass bottles clinking together as the driver called out. Hooves echoed on cobblestones, and kids sometimes snuck sips straight from the porch. Cream floated at the top until shaken down, and families lined bottles by the kitchen door. It was a morning ritual that disappeared with trucks and supermarkets. Girls skipped rope in schoolyards, chanting rhymes that every child seemed to know by heart. Double Dutch ropes whirled faster, squeals rang out when someone missed a step, and laughter echoed against brick walls. Chalk, hopscotch squares, and rope games turned bare pavement into playgrounds. Childhood needed no gadgets, just rhythm, rhyme, and willing friends. In 1920, America's population topped 106 million for the first time, a 15% leap in a decade. The country was growing fast, cities swelling with new arrivals, while rural life still anchored millions. It was the moment the nation felt modern, bigger than ever before, yet still small compared to the crowded country it would become. Families dressed in Sunday best for studio portraits, sitting stiffly under hot lights. Photographers arranged them like statues, faces serious for the long exposure. The photos ended up in heavy albums or frames on mantels. Those portraits captured pride, respectability, and the importance of looking proper, even if behind the camera kids fidgeted and fathers grumbled. Baseball games on the radio brought stadium thrills into kitchens and parlors. The crack of a bat or the roar of a crowd came alive in the imagination, families leaning closer to the speaker. Heroes like Babe Ruth became household names without most people ever seeing them play in person. Radio made baseball truly America's pastime. Barbers still use straight razors and steaming hot towels, lathering soap into thick white foam. The scrape of steel against skin and the warm cloth afterward made the whole visit an experience. For many men, it was the closest thing to luxury in their week, walking out smoother, sharper, and standing just a little taller. Electric fans whirred on summer days, a relief for families sweltering in city apartments. Before air conditioning, people sat shoulder to shoulder in front of the blades, sighing as the breeze brushed their faces. Ice water sweated in pitchers, shirts stuck to backs, and tempers ran short. Those simple fans made the difference between misery and comfort. Wooden roller coasters creaked at seaside amusement parks, pulling riders high before plunging them down with a roar. The wind whipped faces, stomachs dropped, and screams turned to laughter. Couples held hands, kids begged for another ride, and the salty ocean air mixed with the smell of popcorn. It was pure, simple, thrilling fun. Roadside billboards began to rise along new highways, bright paint advertising cigarettes, sodas, or vacation spots. Travelers couldn't miss them. Giant letters and colorful pictures breaking up empty fields. Some called them eyesores, others marvels of modern marketing. Either way, they were proof that America's roads weren't just for driving. They were becoming corridors of commerce. When Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, the whole country cheered. Newspapers blared headlines, radios buzzed, and crowds hailed him as a hero. It was proof that flight had moved from daredevil stunts to something greater. One man in a small plane bridged continents, and for America, the sky suddenly seemed wide open. State fairs brought crowds from every corner of the county. Butter sculptures amazed city folk. New farm machines impressed farmers, and children tugged at parents for candy apples. Prize hogs and quilts stood alongside carousels and midway games. Those fairs weren't just exhibitions. They were celebrations of local pride, hard work, and the promise of progress. Mahjong sets swept in from China, their tiles clattering on kitchen tables as neighbors tried their hand at the exotic new game. Families played late into the night, the air thick with smoke and laughter. It was part puzzle, part gamble, and it felt modern and worldly in the middle of small-town America. The first Talkie changed everything. In 1927, the jazz singer lit up theaters with sound, leaving audiences stunned when Al Jolson spoke the words, "You ain't heard nothin' yet." Suddenly, movies weren't silent shadows anymore. They had voices, songs, and dialogue. It felt as though the future had arrived in one breathtaking evening at the cinema. Women began using rouge, mascara, and lipstick as everyday staples, not just for special occasions. Drugstore counters sold powders and creams in small tins, and mirrors across the country reflected bobbed hair and painted lips. The look scandalized older generations, but gave young women confidence, flair, and a chance to express themselves in bold new ways. Al Capone's name filled headlines across America, tied to shootouts, bootlegging, and bribed officials. People read about speakeasy wars in Chicago as if it were a movie script. Some saw him as a ruthless gangster, others as a folk hero, thumbing his nose at prohibition. Either way, his shadow hung over the whole decade. Cotton gins and textile mills roared across the South, their clattering machines working day and night. Whole families depended on those mills, the air thick with dust and the hours long. Yet the steady hum of those machines meant pay in pockets and lights in homes, even if the work left hands rough and lungs tired. Amos and Andy crackled through radios in millions of living rooms, their voices painting pictures better than any stage. Families gathered close, laughing at every misstep and joke, forgetting the day's troubles for a while. It was the first taste of true national comedy, when a single show could bring the whole country together. Movie palaces rose like cathedrals of entertainment, with velvet seats, chandeliers, and gilded ceilings. Even a small-town theater could feel like royalty's hall. For a dime or a quarter, ordinary folks stepped into a world of glamour, where newsreels and silent comedies lit up the screen beneath painted stars on a vaulted ceiling. Men climbed ladders with brushes in hand, slathering barns with thick red paint made from linseed oil and iron oxide. That color wasn't just tradition. It protected the wood for years. Kids watched from fences as fathers and sons worked together, paint dripping in the grass, the smell of fresh coats mixing with hay and sunshine. Wooden washing machines with hand cranks stood heavy in kitchens and porches, water sloshing as women rolled sleeves and worked the levers. Clothes went through wringers that could catch fingers if you weren't careful. It was back-breaking work, but when the line filled with fresh-washed laundry, the sight meant progress, cleanliness, and a job well done. Drugstores lined their shelves with glass jars filled with tonics, powders, and miracle cures. Labels promised energy, weight loss, or longer life, whether or not the science held up. Folks bought them all the same, sipping bitter brews with hope in their hearts. Those aisles were part medicine, part magic, and a little bit of showmanship. Traveling salesmen hauled heavy cases from door to door, knocking until someone let them in. They sold brushes, shoes, seeds, and miracle gadgets, each pitch rehearsed like theater. For families, a visit broke the routine of daily chores. For salesmen, the road was long, dusty, and uncertain, but it kept food in their pockets. Families saved spare pennies in tin banks shaped like pigs or metal safes. Children rattled them proudly, dreaming of ice cream cones or baseball cards. Saving wasn't just for kids. Parents counted coins for rent or coal. The sound of clinking metal echoing the hope of better days. A few cents felt like real security back then. Barn dances filled the countryside with fiddles, stomping feet, and shouted calls for square dances. Neighbors came from miles around, lanterns glowing through barn slats as couples twirled on rough wooden floors. Pie tables groaned with food, babies slept in corners, and laughter spilled into the night air. It was community, courtship, and celebration all in one. General stores kept brass cuspidors by the counter, and men spat tobacco juice into them between stories. The ping of a clean shot into the spittoon became background music to the clatter of goods and gossip. It wasn't pretty, but it was part of everyday life, and no store porch seemed complete without the habit. Telegraph machines clicked and chattered in railroad depots, their codes carrying news across miles faster than the mail ever could. Agents tapped keys, translating dots and dashes into words that could mean family news or business deals. For travelers waiting nearby, that sharp staccato was the sound of the modern world shrinking before their eyes. Women wore long strings of pearls and fringe dresses to dances, stepping into the glow of jazz halls. Beaded hymns swayed with the music, and perfume lingered in the smoky air. The look was daring, playful, and free. Flappers made sure every move caught attention. That style remains one of the most iconic symbols of the Roaring Twenties. Roadside diners began to rise, their chrome stools and long counters welcoming hungry travelers. Fried eggs, hot coffee, and pie became staples for motorists just discovering America's highways. Waitresses kept plates coming and gossip flowing, while jukeboxes played quietly in the corner. For many, these diners felt like a warm stop in a changing world. Coin-operated phonographs sat in taverns, a nickel slipping into the slot before a record spun to life. Songs filled smoky rooms where men nursed beers and shared stories. The music was scratchy but alive, bringing jazz and blues to places that couldn't afford live bands. Those little boxes gave every bar its own private soundtrack. Families visited war memorials from World War I, still fresh in memory. Names carved in stone were read slowly, hats removed, silence kept. Mothers touched letters, fathers bowed heads, children listened without fully understanding. Those memorials stood in town squares as daily reminders of sacrifice, and for many, grief was still just a few years old. Early talking machines spun records that read bedtime stories to children, the crackle and hiss mixing with voices from far away. Kids stared wide-eyed at the box as if it were magic. Parents marveled at the technology, though nothing quite replaced a story told by a mother or father sitting on the edge of the bed. Kids traded marbles in alleys, pockets jingling with glass shooters and cat's eyes. Games stretched for hours as rules shifted with every group. The thrill of winning a prized marble or losing your best shooter carried all the weight of fortune. Small as they were, those games built memories that lasted long after childhood faded. Coal furnaces filled city neighborhoods with smoke, chimneys belching black plumes into the sky. Clothes on lines gathered soot, and the air smelled heavy, but furnaces kept families warm through brutal winters. Shoveling coal into the firebox was part of daily routine, sweat mixing with ash as men worked to keep the house alive with heat. Homemade soap boiled in kettles behind houses, lye mixed carefully with fat. Women stirred and poured, cautious of burns, while the sharp smell filled the yard. Bars hardened on boards, cut into chunks to last the season. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant clean clothes, scrubbed hands, and pride in self-reliance long before supermarkets lined shelves. Families sat by lamplight reading Saturday Evening Post, its covers painted with Norman Rockwell's America. Children squinted over stories while fathers chuckled at cartoons, mothers pausing recipes to turn pages. The warm glow of kerosene or electric lamps wrapped it all in quiet comfort. That weekly magazine became the mirror of a nation between wars.